What's going on, everyone? So many of you, I'm sure, are very familiar with Ben Simmons. Personality, sports personality. That he sometimes throws out some crazy stuff. Sometimes some things make sense, but he's been in the game for a very long time. And Bill Simmons said, "You wonder if Damian Lillard is watching the Timberwolves, going, you know what? Me for Karl Anthony Towns. You just switch us. We'd have Rudy Gobert. We'd have Anthony Edwards. It's kind of nice, me and Ant together. Maybe that's a better situation for me than anywhere else. F it, Minnesota, I'm adding them to the list." Now, again, Bill Simmons sometimes just throws out stuff just to throw stuff out. I actually don't hate this idea, right? Now, I've talked about Minnesota, and I even made a video the other day talking about, is Minnesota holding Anthony Edwards back? Minnesota was a team that I really looked at, and I was like, man, they could be scary in a couple years. And then they went and traded for Rudy Gobert. Now, to be fair, they didn't have a ton of time on the court together. Karl Anthony Towns was injured a lot last year, and, I get that. But what trading for Rudy Gobert did is, one, it took away what made Karl Anthony Towns so great and special, which is at the center position, his ability to stretch the floor and be arguably the best shooting big man. And then on top of that, his ability to just score the basketball in an elite way, right? And it's nearly impossible for other centers to guard him and defend him. Well, now he goes and switches over to being a power forward, and he's basically every other power forward in the NBA at this point, right? Now, he's 7 foot, and a lot of power forwards in today's NBA are like 6'8", 6'9", but all of them, for the most part, can shoot the ball at least respectively. And, because Karl Anthony Towns, he's a good three-point shooter, but he's not like 45%. He's not some elite level, like ridiculous. He is for the center position, which is, again, what made him so great and special. And you ruined that. You went and got a guy that has no ability to stretch the floor. And what makes Anthony Edwards so great is his ability to just get to the basket at will and use his size, his strength, his athleticism, his foot speed, his quickness, like all of that, and just get to the basket. And it's like layup drills for him, right? But you put a big body in Rudy Gobert and it becomes awkward. And we've seen these awkward moments last year with the Minnesota Timberwolves. And it's like, man, you get a guy in Damian Lillard, now it kind of makes sense, because Karl Anthony Towns is the only way you're going to fix the situation if Minnesota doesn't work out, right? And you could do worse than Damian Lillard. Now, is that maybe the best case scenario? Maybe not. I mean, it depends on what Minnesota wants to do. It depends on what Minnesota would be looking at, like if they ever were to trade Karl Anthony Towns. And this is what I talked about in the other video. And I even said, I'm not saying that they should trade Karl Anthony Towns now, right? I think that you at least give it a few, at least half of the season, right, up until the trade deadline, right? Like give it a look, right, and see, how does this look? Does it mesh? Is it working? And if come the trade deadline, you're like fighting for a play-in spot or something, at that point, I think it's like, okay, well, maybe we should look at trading Karl Anthony Towns, because you're never going to be able to trade Rudy Gobert. And if you do, you're never going to get anything close to what you could get for a Karl Anthony Towns. And you're not going to get anything close to what you gave up. The problem is they ridiculously overpaid for Rudy Gobert. And all they really needed to do was just kind of stay the course. But you look at this roster and you're like, okay, if they traded for Damian Lillard, you have two elite level scorers, an elite level shooter in Dame. Anthony Edwards is one of the best just defensive guards in the league. You'd have Rudy Gobert, who is a guy that could just gobble up all of the rebounds and block shots and protect the paint. You got one of the best just perimeter defenders and Jaden McDaniels, right? Like, so you'd have the defense to put around Damian Lillard to allow Damian Lillard to be effective, right? Like Damian Lillard, his biggest weakness is the defensive side. But any hard defensive assignment in the guard position, You could just put Anthony Edwards on that, right? And then any other like defensive assignment, you could just put Jaden McDaniels on, right? And then you could have a starting five of Damian Lillard, Anthony Edwards, Jaden McDaniels, right? Rudy Gobert, and then Kyle Anderson, and you're set, right? Like you'd be really good. You'd be great defensively. You could just move Mike Conley off the bench if you wanted to, right? And now you have like a legit point guard off the bench to run the second unit. I look at it and I just go, you know what? Like that's not the worst idea ever, right? Like that's not this terrible idea. And I mean, if you absolutely needed to, you could always, like, if you wanted to, I don't really know how I'd feel about this, but I don't think it would be terrible, is like just leave Mike Conley at the point guard position, have Dame play the 2, Anthony Edwards play the 3. Yes, I get he's 6'4", 6'5", but he's got like a 6'9" wingspan. He's super athletic, super quick. He's got good strength, everything. So I think he could guard most of the threes in today's NBA. And then you could have Jaden McDaniels at the 4, and then Rudy Gobert at the 5. And now you have basically 4 wide, which all 4 of those guys would be very switchable. And then Rudy Gobert can just kind of camp out in the paint and just gobble all of the, like I said, the rebounds and just the shot blocking, right? I don't hate that idea either, right? Especially against a team like the Warriors. You know, you could easily do something like that, right? Like Anthony Edwards, I think, could hold his own and make things difficult for Andrew Wiggins or something like that, right? And they're going to run a lot of 3-guard lineups with Steph, Clay, and Chris Paul, right? Like you could put Mike Conley on Chris Paul, put Anthony Edwards on Steph, put Jaden McDaniels on whomever, right? Like on Wiggins if you need to, and then just kind of have Dame just kind of fight over and at least contest on Clay, or you could put Dame on Chris Paul, right? Chris Paul isn't like this he's not the guy he once was on the offensive end, but I don't know. I don't hate the idea of Minnesota looking to trade for Damian Lillard. And look, like Portland isn't going to get a better piece in any trade for Dame than Karl Anthony Towns. Right? The problem is that they definitely would need to get rid of Nurkic. Like, definitely. Karl Anthony Towns is only 27. So, he's just getting into, like, the prime age. So you could have Karl Anthony Towns for the next, 5+ years at least. And he'd still only be 32. And you'd still be in a good position. And then you could figure out what you want to do from there. But I don't hate the idea of Karl Anthony Towns. And worst case scenario, he just becomes maybe even a better trade chip at some point, right? Like you'd probably get more for Karl Anthony Towns in a trade than you would for Damian Lillard. So if that's something that even Minnesota would consider, I don't know how you say no to that, right? Like how do you, like if you're Minnesota, like you go and get Damian Lillard, who he solves a lot of your issues. He helps in the scoring department. He provides just elite level shooting. And the one weakness that he has, you as a team can make up for that lack of effort. And then if you're Portland, it's like, yeah, you'd have to get rid of Nurkic. That would be the problem, right? Like what do we do with Nurkic? Is a team willing to take him on? But Karl Anthony Towns, I mean, Karl Anthony Towns wants to play the 4 anyway. So just have Karl Anthony Towns play the 4, right? Like you could do that as well, right? Like, so technically you wouldn't even need to get rid of Nurkic, right? You could give it a year and see what does Karl Anthony Towns and Nurkic look like. Like, is that miserable? Does it look terrible? Like, how does that look? If it looks good, why not? Right? So you could easily go like a starting lineup of, I don't know, you could go like Scoot Henderson, like Sharp, you could go like Jeremy Grant, Nurkic, and Karl Anthony Towns, right? Or go Simons, whatever. And you'd have like some legit defense. You'd have good size. You'd have everything, right? Like you could be a team that has the potential to make some noise, right? And if Scoot Henderson really does play to like rookie of the year level, maybe you could squeeze into a play-in spot, right? Like you'd have really good size, you'd have really good depth, right? Like again, so you'd have Scoot. Let's say Scoot. Let's just call it Scoot Henderson, Sharp, Jeremy Grant, Karl Anthony Towns, and Nurkic. Right, that's your starting five. You'd still have Simons, Kevin Knox, Thibault. You'd have who else? Nazar Little. I believe he's still there. Chris Murray, who they drafted. Right, like you'd still have several pieces that can really just play various roles and make impacts. And you could always have a Karl Anthony Towns or a Nurkic on the court at all times, right? Like, and Nurkic's passing ability I think would be beneficial. Like, again, I don't hate it, right? Like, it's like, what does Portland want and what are they looking for, right? Like, Portland isn't a fan of what Miami is offering, right, for Damian Lillard. And so Miami's probably not going to be able to just magically get everything that they want. And it sounds like they have a pretty big asking price for Damian Lillard. It's like, I mean, you could make an argument Portland should give up more for Karl Anthony. Like, it should be Dame plus than just a swap. But I think if something like this were to happen, it would probably just be a swap, right? Maybe they make some maneuvers or whatever, but I think it makes a swap. And the only thing that like maybe Portland would look at is like Miami would probably take Nurkic, right? Like, so we'd move off of his contract. But again, like, I don't know. I would at least give it a year with Nurkic and Karl Anthony Towns, right? Like, go run out the starting five that I talked about. See how that looks for a year. And if it doesn't work out, you can always move off of Nurkic, or you could just trade Karl Anthony Towns. You'd still only be 28. And you don't think that there's teams that would probably give you more assets for him than what you'd get for Damian Lillard? I do, right? I think that this would be a pretty good win-win for both sides, right? It would give Portland what they need, just kind of a replacement, a star replacement for the now. It would keep some freshness and excitement in Portland. And then Timberwolves, I mean, you can make an argument that the Timberwolves would be the best team Damian Lillard has ever been on. I mean, the best player Damian Lillard has ever played with is CJ McCollum. And CJ McCollum is a worse version of Damian Lillard. Anthony Edwards is, top, like, he has top 5 potential. Like, he's a better player, all-around better player, in my opinion, in today's time. A better all-around player than Damian Lillard is right now. Right? Like, so you can make an argument that Damian Lillard would be the second best player on Minnesota. Like, that's a pretty good position for Damian Lillard to be in. I don't know. I don't hate the idea. I like the idea. But how do you feel? Again, however you feel, whatever your thoughts are, I'd love to hear it. As always, this is a discussion. So I pass the question on you. What are your thoughts? How do you feel? Do you think, like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense? Would you do that trade? Would you need more one way or the other? How do you feel? Love to hear it. Let me know.